It seems really important, in the spirit of showing expertise from the sector, people who are doing this stuff in their communities with their hands and hearts and minds and are really making a very, very tangible difference on the ground. So you're enormously welcome. Thank you so much for your time. John, I think you're going to speak first, aren't you, John?
I am, quickly, just to do a sort of introduction to put it in context. And then I'm going to give Linda and Afzal a chance to tell you about the work they've been doing in a particular community in Birmingham, which I think is a real example of community-driven ways of building capacity and resilience. The work that I've been doing in general is called, I seem to have lost the title slide, Growing Older Together, the Development of Collaborative Ways of Living for Older People. And I started very much from a housing perspective. I'm a housing person. I'm not a social worker. I'm a housing person, particularly a cooperative housing person. And so I started about 6 years ago just going out to see examples, or to find examples of housing for older people that they develop, own and manage. And I did that because I thought that these types of housing and these ways of living might be particularly effective for older people, not just in terms of putting a roof over their head, but in terms of how they live their lives as older people. I discovered quite quickly that there were quite a lot of examples of these types of housing, but they weren't widely known about by older people themselves. They didn't know that these types of housing existed, but equally, the world of housing didn't know much about these forms of housing. In as much as people did know about them, they thought about cooperatives, or particularly what's called co-housing schemes. And it is true that senior co-housing, which is housing developed by groups of older people themselves, is beginning to be more in the news. And I don't know whether you saw recently the BBC news coverage of the Older Women's Co-Housing Project in London, which has recently opened. The BBC have produced a short piece on their website. This piece has had 4.6 million hits. So clearly there is a huge interest and appetite amongst older people for forms of housing that enable them to be in control of how they live their lives. But it doesn't have to be all done on a do-it-yourself basis. There is huge potential for what I would call off-the-shelf schemes by socially progressive developers, in which they develop out housing, but then say to people, come and live in this housing, you will own it, you will run it, it'll be your housing. It will belong to you. And there are a few examples of that, and hopefully more. But the real potential from a housing perspective is actually the repurposing of existing housing for older people. Sheltered housing schemes, retirement housing schemes, many of them could be managed and run by the people who live in them in a way that suits their particular needs and their priorities. And there is also increasing scope for a lot of what you call general housing, because particularly in the social housing sector, the proportion of older tenants is growing significantly. And in many what you might call general needs developments, you'll find that perhaps 75% of the people who are living in that housing are older people. So why can't they also have a much more active role in how they run their housing? But nonetheless, it's clear that most older people, for whatever reason, are going to continue to live in their neighbourhoods they're living in now. And having looked at housing, specifically housing-based ways of living, I began to take an interest in what is called collaborative ageing in place. And I've just realised I've missed out on a slide. I'll jump back to that. In terms of what I was finding in terms of the housing developments, whether they were self-build or off the peg or what have you, the reported benefits from the older people I was talking to were similar. They said these ways of living provide what they called sustainable independence. They were able to remain independent much longer. It gave them peace of mind and security. They supported active and sociable communities. So people lived in these schemes, felt that there was a natural way in which they were part of a community. And importantly, engendered mutual care and support. People were looking after each other and helping each other in a whole range of ways. And the evidence was that this led to greatly enhanced well-being amongst the people who were living in these types of housing, but also, in the light of the context of what we're talking about today, reduced dependency. But then I went on to look about what might happen within existing communities and neighbourhood. Were the ways in which people, older people themselves, through peer-to-peer or intergenerational networks, could begin to live much more collaboratively? And how could they work together with healthcare and housing agencies to develop these collaborative ways of living? There were very few examples of this that I came across. You'll find them in some of the reports I've written. One in Yorkshire called Esmore's Caring, another one in Suffolk, which you may have heard of, called the Debenham Project, which is all around supporting people with dementia. But perhaps importantly and relevantly, Whitton Lodge Community Association was a really exciting example of this form of collaborative ways of living. Elsewhere, much more progress is being made, and I would draw your attention to something called the village-to-village movement in the States, where there are now 150 community-based networks of older people organising not just social activities, but forms of self-help and self-care on quite an extensive basis. And the movement's growing rapidly in the States, another 200 in the pipeline. Perhaps 100,000 older people will be living in these villages, in their own neighbourhoods, in their own communities in time to come. Looking ahead, we've all heard about the demographics and changing social patterns. I think we need to hit reality in terms of how we think about these things. State provision will never be sufficient. And in my view, we need to turn things on their head. State provision should actually be seen as complementary to what people do for themselves. Of course, there will be need for it, particularly when people become quite ill and frail. But we should start from a point of view that it is people and communities that define how they want to live. And so we need a range of collaborative ways of doing things in which older people retain control over their lives to the greatest possible extent. I'm now going to ask, seems to have stopped working, Linda and Avsal from Whitton Lodge Community Association to take over. They're starting with a short video.
Yes, short video.
Which tells them about their project.
The words don't say enough, the pictures do. remember everyone.
Thanks very, very much for that. I appreciate we're way over time, but I think we're being as quick as we can. What I'm going to do now is ask Linda and Avsal some questions about Witten Lodge, about the history, and in particular to move on to the work they've been doing around health and well-being, but starting initially with housing. I think this is probably more a question for you, Linda. That short video gave an idea of the history of the community association and the fact that you have very much been driving the redevelopment in the area and that you own and indeed manage much of the housing in the area. I know that the housing needs of older people figured in your thinking right from the start. Could you tell us a little bit more about how that's worked?
Well, it had to, because the majority of the people living in Perry Common before the demolition were older people. And so we didn't physically go and think, I didn't personally think, okay, we need to think about how do we home these build homes for these older people. It morphed into what it is, but morphed in a very different way, because what you can do and what Perry Common had was antisocial behaviour, because there were lots of the same, if I can say, the same tenure of people living in one place, younger people one place, older. So what we didn't do is want all older people's homes to be built in one space. We were the first probably to actually have semi-detached properties with a bungalow attached to a 3-bed family house. And they said it would never work. Oh, it does. And they look after each other, and they've been very successful. What we did as well is we built Sycamore Court, which is our extra care scheme, 40 apartments. Go on,
come on to that.
Okay, you want to come on to that. Okay. All of our general needs properties that we've built are built to lifetime standards. I would say they're built to whole life standards more than lifetime. They've all got turning circles, they've all got wide stairs for a stair lift. In our bungalows, they've got supported ceilings for a hoist from the bathroom to the bedroom, even if they don't ever use that.
I think the point here, which is important, is that this was 25 years ago.
Absolutely.
This was community-led. There were no strategies, or very few, on lifetime homes.
Didn't know what a strategy
but
was back then.
Because the community recognised the number of older people in that community,
Yeah.
and were age sensitive, if that's the right word for it right from the start,
Yeah.
there was a community-led approach, which I think was really
Absolutely.
exciting. I mean, I think the bungalows next to the houses is genius. But can I get on to Sycamore Court?
Can I just say one thing? Our philosophy has always been, if it's not good enough for my mum to live in, it's not good enough.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And whatever we do, we always think of that.
Can I come on to Sycamore Court? Because I know that Birmingham City Council came to you with some initial ideas around an extra care scheme, but asked you to be involved.
No, that's not right.
Oh, right.
No.
You tell me the story.
I remember the board meeting. They came to us and they put in a grant application, Birmingham City Council, without telling us, thinking they wouldn't get the money. And they secured £1.5 million for an extra care scheme. And it said, do you want the money? Yes, we do. What's an extra care scheme?
Yeah.
And then we
So they came to you?
They came to us with money.
But the scheme, as developed, is in your management, isn't it?
We own it.
You own and manage this scheme,
own.
which again is unusual. Here we have a community that owns the provision. So I wonder if you could tell me then, in terms of how that scheme is now runs, how it particularly responds to the needs of the community and older people in particular.
Well, because 908 homes had to be demolished, there were a lot of older people living in those, probably in a 3-bed house, and they live on their own. So those were the first people who actually were allocated to Sycamore Court. It's older people are not 55 and over. You know, it's going down to 50. But what we are is the only extra care in Birmingham who doesn't have an age criteria. So we take younger people. If they need the support of that building, not necessarily care, but if they need the support of the building and accessibility and the support workers that's being done there, And the younger people and the older people look after each other.
And also people move in and out.
They
which is
do.
good.
You usually, I believed, only went out of an extra care scheme one way.
Yeah.
But actually, one of the younger people who came in a wheelchair, whose house had 3 steps and she couldn't get in or out, she moved into one of our bungalows and found a husband and became a director.
Well, I think that's another really important feature of the community-led approach. Can you also tell me, I mean, a lot of people talk about extra care schemes as a resource, but there's a danger that's imposed.
Yes.
But in your case, it is
all
a resource, but it kind of comes from the community.
It was, and it was always independent living, and we were always there as resident directors to get our hands dirty and to provide activities, but with them planning it as well. So it was their home.
Tell me about the choir.
The community choir that I set up 14 years ago is very different, and we don't hold auditions. We have the wonderful Ajab, who lives at Sycamore Court, severe learning difficulties, younger man, will never be able to sing, can't read, but the joy that man brings to that choir is amazing, and to him. And so we've got a blind girl who, again, you know...
And Sycamore Court is the base
Sycamore
of the choir.
Court, we practice at Sycamore Court, so we take it to them. But we've got very able people from other choirs who do that as well, and it's just, we've performed many places, and it's just a joy.
Okay. I want to sort of perhaps give Afzal a chance.
Yes, please do.
Afzal's arrived more recently, but he's inherited all of that tradition. But working with Linda and the others has really expanded, I think, the whole way in which Witten Lodge operates. And so I wonder if you could tell us, Afzal, a bit about the work you're doing in terms of well-being and the health and care of older people across the community as a whole.
Just a couple of observations, really. One, we talk about an aging population, people living longer. I was sitting there thinking, when has that not been the case in the history of time? When have people not lived longer? Kind of, in times of war or famine or natural, I can imagine that's okay, but surely since the beginning of time, we have kind of gradually aged and kind of lived longer. Each generation on the whole has, and we've adapted. So there's no God-given right to a particular model or way of working, and I think part of hopefully what you got from those kind of images was actually there are older people, younger people, and there's community in sense of, and that's what we have been. So we are, you know, relational kind of beings, and older people are part and parcel of what it means to be. Full stop, really. So I think this way of someone talking about commodification, I feel that's how we tend to talk about older people in. And now I get there are things that we need to do in a particular way, but so living longer is a great thing, is a great thing. And what we look to do is celebrate that. Actually, older people in our part of the world are the glue that holds that community together. They are not there. So I'm not going to talk about it. So that's really what makes it happen. So we have a number of volunteers, not just on our board, but actually people who deliver services. So whether it's on the jobs and skills or health and well-being, these are older people who are using and sharing their knowledge, their experience, their life skills and practical skills in helping us to deliver things. And it's not just the things that you might think about. Yesterday, we had our meeting on hydroelectric power. I don't know if any of you know north of Birmingham or in the last time we had done some, but the people who are leading that are older. They're mainly guys, but actually they're putting some of that stuff back on some more well-being kind of work that you're talking about, you're asking about, John. Actually, that work is delivered by a number of older people. And I have to say, on the whole, I mean, I know we've got some guys, but on the whole, older people, and it's women. as well, who are holding that community together. So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Well, no, I think it does, but I think the reason why this has been able to happen Witten Lodge, and the reason why it doesn't happen on the whole elsewhere, is precisely because the community association is there to provide a kind of framework, a platform for all these other activities, and the community association belongs to the community.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Can I, having said that, given the nature of the audience, I don't know what's happened to the time, could I, obviously in doing some of your work, though you interact with, you work with agencies, and how has that collaborative work developed? How does it work out? You know, what's worked well and what's perhaps not quite so well in terms of working with social care, health agencies and so on?
Well, what works well on the whole is when people come with a kind of an approach that they think something can be done. I mean, what we've done is, I mean, language is really important in all of this. I mean, whether it's strength-based working or asset-based community development or social prescribing, whatever it is, I mean, that language evolves and changes. I mean, we didn't realise we were doing all of this.
Social prescribing, and so it's called social prescribing.
But we will continue to do it. I think what's really fundamentally made a difference, whether that's been with kind of colleagues in social work or health or GPs or whatever it is, actually when people have come with an approach which says actually there's a solution that we can co-create and develop, we are a partner in that process with people. But actually fundamentally it is about placing people at the heart of that. And if we don't think actually that it does that, there's some other kind of silo, then we often kind of say, that isn't going to work with us particularly in this way. And so those relationships that we have, and they are relationships with organisations and agencies, we tend to kind of work and develop those where there is a common aim and an outcome. So for us, it is longer term. Linda talks about, kind of getting going. It's been 25 years in the making with Whitton Lodge, and some of the stuff that you're seeing has taken that long. It's taken that time to get to that point, and that's what we say to organisations, that we are here about investing in the long term.
It seems like a good juncture, perhaps, to invite any questions from the room. I mean, I certainly want to go and live in a community where there are swings in the bus stops and every bungalow comes with a free husband.
We're thinking we've parked that idea.
But you may have less frivolous questions to ask. So can I invite any comments or questions? Or I would ask you not to try and make Linda come and work with you directly, because she's a bit busy, and I'm sure that's what everyone wants to do immediately. Thoughts from the floor then? Hiya, colleague here.
It's more of a comment really than a question. My name's Marie Harrison. I'm one of the social workers in Knowsley Social Services, which for those who are not aware is a borough in Merseyside. I'm one of those social workers who's really, really interested in housing, to the point that an alternative suitable career would be an estate agent. So I really enjoy housing. However, I'm a big fan of extra care. Big fan of extra care, and we've got extra care facilities in Knowsley, but they're hugely oversubscribed at the moment. There's currently one that's not even built yet, and there's about 800 applications. So, but I'm continually surprised when I do go out on assessments. I always bring up extra care, even if it's for future, because often we're going up to see people who've got degenerative conditions that are going to, worse and worse, and a higher level of need. They're going to deteriorate in their health, and I don't think lots and lots of people are not even aware, carers and families are not even aware of extra care. So that's one of my comments with regard to extra care. But I always explain to people, piece of cake, he says garlic bread, it's the future. I always say extra care and housing, extra care housing, it's the future in my view. So I'm a big fan of it. But I have a concern about, particularly in Knowsley, there's high levels of poverty, and with the cost in care contributions being hiked up, lots of people who are vulnerable and at risk are declining any form of provision because of the cost. But within extra care at the moment, it's the sort of a triage basis that, they look at the level of needs, but those who are requiring a package of care will be prioritised, to access extra care, which for the people who can't afford a package of care means they'll be lower on the list, and then if somebody else comes in with a higher level of support, they'll go to the top of the list. So my concern is that people who are vulnerable and at risk but can't afford care are not going to access extra care. So,
is that a dilemma you face at Whitton Lodge? Have you had to contend
no,
with
it's
that?
not actually, because we take direct referrals, and you can apply directly to us. We do take referrals from the local authority, but actually part of our criteria for accommodation, any kind of accommodation, is kind of local connectivity, the sense of community, what's your relationship with the people and the place. So we take that into account. We also look at our rents and our costs. Whitton Lodge was set up as a way of ensuring that we're able to be affordable in the genuine sense of the word. So we ensure that is how we approach it. So I think, and we are, there was talk earlier about being a registered provider. We're a non-registered provider, actually. So We have greater flexibility, and every year, pretty much the board, looks at the issue: should we register or not? There are some pros and some, cons to it, and we decided not to, which means actually we're able to, meet the needs, but also celebrate. It's the other side of it as well, really, the asset side of it. So along with the choir, we have a gardening group which is called 50 Shades of Green.
They chose it. The older people chose the
there is the walking group, the Red Hot
Chili
Chili
Steppers.
Steppers. So actually, it is also about the things that people can do, and they, those walks are being led. The gardening
We're
group
on
is
a
doing.
duckling watch this afternoon.
Yeah. Would it be helpful in terms of the overall situation regarding extra care, Jeremy? Do you want to comment about?
Look, there's a whole diversity. There's no one regulation around what the composition of extra care should be, but by and large, the balance of the community is really important, so that it doesn't just become a default for an alternative to residential care or indeed nursing. But we do have to recognise increasing number of people with dementia and on other long-term illnesses. The traditional model is very much a third, low, middle, moderate and higher needs. It is now, but there are about 27 different policies and practices around the country, but it tends to become a slightly more dependent model with about 20, 40, 40, low, medium and high. So again, I don't know whether that's starting to reflect in your allocations, but again, coming back to the social work, the joint case management approach with housing officers, sometimes with OTs, is really, and advocates is really critical as well.
Thank you. I think we can take another question or point. I think you've touched on something really interesting that I'm sure we'll return to throughout the day there, around the other forms of integration, the integration of social work and housing, and being modelled excellently by the colleague there, and your joint interest, but also the integration of older people and younger people, it not being this kind of polarised, separatist kind of approach. I know they're going to be enduring threads across the day. But any other comments or questions or thoughts that you'd like to ask of colleagues right now?
Can I just make a comment if nobody else is
Absolutely.
going to put their hand up? One of our directors, Mary, is 96 in October. She was on reception yesterday volunteering and signing people in and welcoming them, giving them a newsletter, if they'd parked in the wrong place, she would tell them. And she told the Chief Constable of the police, which was really embarrassing that he parked in the wrong place. But he moved his car. And it's when she talks at local schools, they said, were you born when there were wooden wheels? And she says, just after. And she's got this, it's wonderful. There's a richness with everybody if you look for it.
I think that comes through so loud and clear in the work you're doing. We're going to keep you for a bit longer. I heard duckling watch being mentioned. How soon do we lose you to the ducklings?
I've got a dog that needs walking and ducks that need watching.
Can we keep you for a coffee? Is that all right, Linda? Just so
For
we
a
can
coffee
bother you
and
for a
then
little
what?
bit. All right, thanks. That'd be really helpful. You have absolutely embodied how much more than bricks and mortar this is. It's come through so clearly. I can't thank you enough for your time. I know how busy you all are.
Which is why we wanted to play the video.
Yes, I know. Well, you won, didn't you? You got the video. We're over time. It was
It's not our
absolutely
fault.
worth it. It was worth it. Every second of it was worth it. I think that if there are colleagues who perhaps after that initial session, some of the policy rhetoric, we can't get away from resources, just that feeling of, God, this is hard. It's so helpful to finish on a hopeful note, and you've done that for us very well. So thank you very much indeed, colleagues.